The dog came out of the woods running for its life, and it was carrying a human cane in its mouth. Officer Daniel Brooks slammed on the brakes as the German Shepherd skidded into the middle of the road, shaking, panting, eyes wide with pure desperation. Before Daniel could even open his door, the dog dropped the cane at his feet, then began barking and whining in a way that didn't sound like a dog at all. It sounded like a cry for help. Daniel froze. Dogs don't bring canes to police officers. Dogs don't block traffic. Dogs don't look at you like this begging, pleading, terrified. Something was very, very wrong. The shepherd spun and dashed toward the forest, then stopped and looked back. Trembling, it wasn't running away. It was trying to lead him. And when Daniel finally followed the dog into the trees, what he found lying on the forest floor would break his heart and the whole town's. Before we start, make sure to hit like, subscribe, and really I'm curious, where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. I love seeing how far our stories travel. Officer Daniel Brooks drove his patrol cruiser slowly along the tree-lined road, the rhythmic hum of the engine the only sound breaking the stillness. Days like this were rare. No calls, no emergencies, just endless stretches of peaceful emptiness. Most officers found it boring. Daniel found it calming. Tall pines swayed gently on either side of the road, their branches whispering in the warm breeze. Birds dipped in and out of view, scattering across the sky as the cruiser approached. Occasionally, a squirrel darted across the pavement. But otherwise, the world felt untouched, almost frozen in a kind of rural silence that only existed. Miles away from the nearest town, Daniel adjusted his sunglasses and rested one hand on the steering wheel. Another quiet shift, he murmured to himself. Maybe to calm. He slowed the cruiser near an old wooden sign marking the county line. Nothing unusual. No parked cars. No stranded hikers. No one wandering the forest trails, just trees. Miles and miles of trees. He expected the rest of his shift to continue, just like this quiet. Uneventful, forgettable. But as he rounded the next bend, something made him slam the brakes. A single figure sat in the middle of the road. Not a person, a dog, a German Shepherd. Sitting perfectly still on the asphalt, as if waiting for him, Daniel frowned, instinctively reaching for the radio. Nothing. About this felt normal, and he was right, because this was the moment his quiet shift would turn into the most unforgettable rescue of his career. Daniel's foot hovered over the brake pedal, heart thudding once in confusion. The German Shepherd didn't move, not an inch. It sat right in the center of the road, head lifted, ears stiff, eyes locked on the cruiser as if it had been waiting specifically for him. Animals usually ran from cars. This one didn't even blink. Daniel slowly rolled the window down. "Hey there. You lost?" He called out gently. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl. Instead, it tilted its head just slightly, like it understood every word. Something about its posture made Daniel tense. This wasn't a stray scavenging for food. The dog was too clean, too healthy, too alert. Its fur gleamed in the afternoon light, and a faint collar peeked through the thick hair around its neck. It had an owner, but where was the owner? Daniel stepped out of the cruiser, keeping his movements slow. "Easy, boy. I'm not here to hurt you." The dog rose to its feet, not aggressively but with purpose. It took 3 steps forward, then stopped exactly 10 feet away, staring at Daniel with eyes so intense it made the officer pause. They weren't wild or fearful, they were pleading. Daniel glanced around the surrounding woods. The forest pressed in close, dense, and quiet. If someone was out there, injured, lost, afraid he couldn't see them. "Is someone with you?" Daniel asked. The dog let out a soft whine, barely audible. Then it turned around, not to flee but to lead. It walked a few steps toward the tree line, stopped, and looked back at Daniel. The message was unmistakable. "Follow me." A chill rippled down Daniel's spine. Dogs didn't behave like this, unless something was terribly wrong. He took a cautious step forward, and that was when he noticed the faint outline of something long and curved held gently in the dog's mouth. It wasn't a stick, it was a cane, and Daniel realized instantly someone nearby needed help. Daniel froze mid-step, eyes narrowing as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The German Shepherd stood at the edge of the road, and now that the light hit just right, Daniel could clearly see the object clenched between its teeth. Curved wooden cane, polished smooth from years of use. A cane, not a branch, not a toy. A cane meant only one thing. Its owner couldn't walk without it. Daniel's chest tightened. The dog took a few slow steps toward him, holding the cane carefully as if it were the most precious thing in the world. When it reached him, it gently placed the cane at his feet, not dropped. Placed, then it nudged the cane toward Daniel with its nose. Looking up at him with wide, desperate eyes, Daniel crouched slowly, picking up the cane. The wood was warm, worn at the handle, and faintly scratched. This wasn't something newly lost. Someone had used this cane daily, maybe struggled with it. Someone who now wasn't here. Where's your owner? Daniel whispered. The dog whimpered, a sound so soft, yet so full of pain, that it went straight to Daniel's heart. Suddenly, the dog turned sharply toward the woods and barked once loud, urgent, demanding. Then it spun back to Daniel, eyes begging him to follow. Daniel felt the hairs on his arms rise. This wasn't random behavior. The dog wasn't confused or wandering. It was communicating clearly, desperately. The officer glanced at the dense trees beyond the road. If the owner had collapsed, gotten lost, suffered an attack, there would be no way to see them from here. The dog barked again, louder this time. Pacing between Daniel and the trees like a guide losing patience, the message couldn't be clearer. He's in there. He needs help. Come now. Daniel tightened his grip on the cane. All right, boy, he said, standing tall. Lead the way. The dog spun and sprinted toward the forest trail without hesitation, and Daniel followed because he already knew this dog wasn't just showing him something, it was trying to save someone's life. The German Shepherd darted a few feet into the trees, then abruptly stopped and turned back, checking to make sure Daniel was following. When Daniel stepped forward, the dog let out a breathy whine, half relief, half urgency, and continued deeper, but it wasn't moving in a straight line. It kept circling back to Daniel, nudging his leg, pacing around him in tight loops before sprinting ahead again. Every movement screamed desperation. This wasn't a dog leading a casual search. This was a dog in full-blown panic, terrified of what might happen if help didn't arrive in time. Daniel tightened his grip on the cane. Easy, boy. I'm right here. Dog barked sharply, tail lowered, ears pressed back, not in aggression, but in fear. It kept glancing at the forest floor, sniffing frantically, then charging ahead before skidding to a stop again. Daniel recognized the behavior instantly. Search dogs only acted like this when they knew their person was alive. But fading, the forest grew darker as they moved farther from the road, the thick canopy blocking the sunlight. Daniel's boots crunched through leaves and broken twigs. He scanned every direction, looking for any sign of the cane's owner. Is he hurt? Daniel called out. Though he knew the dog couldn't answer, the German Shepherd suddenly froze. Its entire body stiffened, muscles taut. Tail rigid, nose pointed toward a cluster of thick underbrush. Then it whimpered, a low, a heartbreaking sound that made Daniel's stomach twist. The dog pressed its paw against Daniel's leg, almost pushing him toward the direction of the bushes. It nudged his hand, then the cane, and barked so loudly the sound shattered the quiet forest air. Okay, Daniel whispered, heart pounding. I'm coming. The dog shot forward again, this time without hesitation, straight toward a narrow trail almost hidden by fallen branches. Daniel followed quickly, adrenaline kicking in hard now. Something was ahead. Something the dog had been terrified to face alone, and whatever it was, the dog was begging him to reach it in time. Daniel pushed aside a curtain of branches as the German Shepherd bolted ahead, weaving through the forest like it had memorized every route, every rock, every twist in the trail. The dog kept looking back, eyes wide, tail low, checking that Daniel hadn't fallen behind. "I'm here," Daniel called out, breath steady but heart racing. "Keep going, boy. I'm right behind you." The trail narrowed, forcing Daniel to duck under fallen limbs and sidestep moss-covered stones. Every few seconds, the dog would stop, bark sharply, and then sprint ahead again, its movements frantic but purposeful. The forest grew darker the deeper they went. Sunlight pierced through gaps in the canopy and thin, trembling beams that lit pieces of the path like warnings. Daniel's ears tuned into every sound, the rustle of leaves, the dog's rapid breathing, even his own heartbeat thudding louder with each step. "Someone's out here," he murmured. "Someone who needed this cane." The dog suddenly halted. It stood perfectly still, one paw lifted mid-step, ears locked forward at a slight incline. Then it turned to Daniel and whimpered, a soft, broken sound that sent a chill down Daniel's spine. "You found him, didn't you?" Daniel whispered. The dog nudged Daniel's leg once before turning sharply to the right, pushing through a thick cluster of bushes. Daniel followed, pushing branches aside as they snapped back and brushed his uniform. Beyond the bushes, the terrain dipped suddenly into a shallow ravine. Roots twisted down the slope like desperate fingers clinging to the earth. The dog slid down the incline with controlled urgency. Barking up at Daniel to follow, Daniel tightened his grip on the cane and carefully made his way down. The dog barked. Again this time, a deep, mournful cry that echoed across the hollow. Daniel's stomach dropped. He knew that sound. He'd heard it only from dogs that feared their human was slipping away, and somewhere, just beyond the next cluster of trees, someone was waiting for him in the silence. Daniel reached the bottom of the ravine, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth. The air felt heavier here still, muffled, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. The German shepherd trotted a few feet ahead, nose pressed to the ground, sniffing with sharp, desperate pulls of air. Then Daniel saw it. A dark wool hat lay crumpled against a fallen branch. Not weathered, not old. Recently dropped. It had pine needles stuck to its fabric, as if it had been dragged or fallen during a struggle. Daniel picked it up, brushing off the leaves. "This belonged to someone," he murmured. "Someone who didn't walk out of here on their own?" The dog whimpered softly, circling the hat, nudging it once before looking up at Daniel with pleading eyes. A few steps farther, Daniel spotted something else, a silver thermos half buried in moss. He crouched and lifted it. The metal was still warm, fresh, meaning whoever had been here hadn't been gone long. Daniel's pulse quickened. He moved deeper into the ravine, scanning the ground. That's when he noticed the prints, deep, uneven marks pressed into the dirt. Not footprints. Not animal tracks. Kneeling, dragging signs of a person who could no longer walk. His heart clenched. An elderly man. Daniel whispered. That cane wasn't just for support. He depends on it. The dog barked sharply, pulling him from his thoughts. It sprinted forward several yards before stopping again, tail tucked, ears pointed toward a cluster of tangled roots and fallen leaves. Daniel stepped forward, senses on high alert. Every instinct screamed that he was getting closer, not just to a person, but to a person in serious danger. The dog let out another urgent cry. Pawing at the ground near the base of an old oak tree, something had happened here. Something that explained the cane, the hat, the thermos, in the dog's desperate panic. And Daniel braced himself because whatever he was about to find next would change the entire search. The German shepherd's behavior changed sharply, no longer pacing or circling, but trembling with frantic urgency. Its claws raked at the dirt beside the massive oak tree, scattering leaves in every direction. Every scratch was a plea. Every whine was a countdown. Daniel hurried toward the dog, heart pounding. "What is it, boy? Show me." The dog barked one loud, desperate cry, then dug harder, its paws moving so fast that dirt flew against Daniel's boots. It kept glancing back at him, eyes wide with fear. Not fear of danger. Fear of being too late. The forest suddenly felt colder, still heavy. Daniel crouched and pushed aside the loosened leaves. Beneath them, the soil was disturbed, freshly moved, uneven, marked by something heavy having dragged across it. Daniel's breath caught. A broken pair of reading glasses lay half buried in the dirt. The dog whimpered and pawed again, then sprinted a few steps ahead toward a narrow creek bed lined with rocks. It barked, spun around, sprinted back, then tugged at Daniel's sleeve with its teeth, urging him to move faster. All right, time coming," Daniel gasped, picking up his pace. The dog bolted forward, leaping over roots and fallen branches with renewed urgency. Daniel followed, adrenaline surging through him. He could feel it now, the sense of danger closing in, the invisible pressure in the air, the haunting stillness that only surrounds someone who is fighting to stay alive. The dog skidded to a stop at the edge of the creek. It barked again, louder, breaking with emotion, and pawed at the ground right beside the water, frantic. Daniel slid down the slope, breath sharp. Something was there, something the dog refused to face alone. And as Daniel pushed through the last cluster of brush, his stomach dropped because the urgency suddenly made perfect sense. Daniel pushed aside the final curtain of brush, his breath catching in his throat as the scene unfolded before him, their half-dash hidden. At the base of the creek bank lay an elderly man. He was collapsed on his side, one arm draped limply across the rocks, the other twisted against his chest. His clothes were soaked from the damp ground. His face was pale, far too pale, and his lips carried a faint bluish tint. His chest rose only slightly with each slow, struggling breath. The German shepherd rushed to him instantly, whining and nudging the man's shoulder with desperate gentleness. The dog licked the man's cheek, circled him, then pressed its head against his arm. Trembling, Daniel knelt beside them, fear tightening his chest. "Sir, can you hear me?" The man didn't answer. His eyes fluttered open for a brief second, cloudy. Unfocused, Daniel saw the pain buried behind them. The man tried to speak, but only a faint rasp escaped his lips. Daniel quickly checked his pulse, weak, thready. His hands were icy cold. "When did you fall?" Daniel whispered, knowing the man couldn't answer. "How long have you been out here?" The dog let out a soft, choked whine, nudging the man again, as if begging him to wake up. It circled twice, then pressed its body against the man's side, trying to keep him warm. This wasn't just loyalty. This was love, the kind of bond forged over years, not days. Daniel scanned the area. There were deep drag marks in the dirt, patches of disturbed leaves, and a long scrape mark across the rocks. He tried to move, Daniel murmured. He tried to crawl for help. His voice cracked, but he hadn't made it far. And without the cane, without support, the man must have collapsed from exhaustion. Or worse. Daniel pulled out his radio with shaking hands. "Dispatch, this is Officer Brooks," he said urgently. "I've located an injured elderly male in the woods off County Road 7. He's unconscious, barely breathing. I need EMS now." The German shepherd barked once at the radio, a sound filled with both hope and pleading. Daniel placed a steadying hand on the dog's back. "Don't worry," he whispered. "We're going to save him." Even if time was dangerously close to running out, the German shepherd pressed itself against the old man's chest, as if trying to share its own warmth with him. Its body trembled not from cold, but from fear. Deep, wrenching fear. The kind Daniel had only ever seen in dogs that realized their human might not survive. "Hey, buddy," Daniel whispered, gently stroking the dog's back. "We've got help coming. Stay with him." But the dog wasn't listening. It let out a long, broken whine and pawed softly at the man's coat, nudging his arm as if begging him to respond. When the man didn't move, the dog let out a heart-piercing cry, one that echoed across the ravine like grief itself. Daniel swallowed hard. He'd seen injured people before. He'd seen loyal dogs before, but never this. The dog circled the man's body once, then pressed its forehead to the man's shoulder, whimpering in a sound so human it made Daniel's eyes sting. It wasn't just loyalty. It was panic, guilt, desperation. The dog knew something was wrong, and it was terrified that it had failed the person it loved most. "Hey," Daniel murmured, his voice softer now. He placed a hand gently on the dog's cheek. "You brought me the cane. You did everything right. You saved him." The dog lifted its head slowly, eyes glossy with pain. It stared at Daniel as if trying to understand his words, trying to believe them. Then it rested its head on the man's chest again, breathing in shallow, shaky bursts. Its tail lay completely still. Not a wag, not a twitch, just stillness. Daniel felt the weight of the moment settle deep in his chest. This was not just a rescue. This was a bond between two souls fighting the same battle, one to stay alive, the other to keep him alive, and until help arrived. The dog refused to leave the man's side, not even for a second. Daniel dropped to his knees beside the old man, his hands working quickly, urgently. He loosened the man's collar, checked his airway, and tilted his head gently to keep it open. The man's chest rose only slightly uneven, shallow, struggling. His skin felt cold, frighteningly cold, even beneath the touch of the warm afternoon air filtering through the trees. "Stay with me," Daniel whispered. "Help is coming. Just hold on." The German Shepherd hovered anxiously, pacing in a tight circle, then returning to press its body against the man's arm as if offering strength. Every few seconds, the dog let out a soft, desperate whine. It was as if the dog understood that every moment mattered. Daniel grabbed his radio again. "Dispatch, I need an ETA on EMS." 5 minutes out, the voice crackled. "Keep him stable." 5 minutes, it felt like an eternity. Daniel removed his jacket and draped it over the man's torso, trying to trap any warmth he could. The old man's lips quivered slightly, maybe from cold, maybe from the effort of staying conscious. "Sir, can you hear me?" Daniel asked, lowering his voice. "Don't give up. Your dog brought me. He's fighting for you. You fight too." The man's eyelids flickered, barely opening. A faint whisper escaped his lips, too weak to form words, but his gaze shifted, just enough to recognize the shape beside him. His dog, the German Shepherd, immediately crawled closer, gently licking the man's hand. The old man's fingers twitched, curling ever so slightly around the dog's fur. It was enough. "Good," Daniel said firmly. "Stay with us. Stay awake." The man's breathing faltered again, and Daniel placed 2 fingers under his jaw, feeling the thready pulse. It was weakening. "We're losing time," Daniel muttered under his breath. He checked the clearing, listening, hoping, then finally heard its sirens, distant at first. Then, growing louder, the dog's ears shot up. Its tail wagged once, just once before. It leaned protectively over its owner again. "All right," Daniel breathed out. "Hold on. Help is almost here." And in that moment, it wasn't just the man fighting for life. The dog was fighting with him, heart, soul. The ambulance skidded to a stop at the edge of the ravine, tires crunching against the gravel. Paramedics leapt out before the engine even finished rumbling, grabbing equipment as Daniel waved them down toward the creek. "Down here," he shouted. "He's barely responsive." The German Shepherd barked anxiously as the medics rushed in, its tail tucked tight, body tense like a spring ready to snap. When the first paramedic knelt beside the old man, the dog tried to climb onto him, pressing close, refusing to be separated. "Easy, boy," one medic said softly. "We're here to help him." But the dog didn't trust them. Not yet. It hovered protectively, watching every movement with trembling intensity. Daniel gently grabbed the dog's collar and pulled, back just enough for the medics to work. "Let them help. They're going to save him." The dog whimpered, but allowed it. The medics checked vitals quickly, oxygen low, blood pressure dropping, pulse fading. One medic pressed a mask to the man's face, while another prepared a portable defibrillator. "He's in critical condition," the paramedic muttered. "We need to move him now." They carefully lifted the man onto a stretcher. His head lolled to the side, breath uneven, body limp. The dog barked frantically and tried to jump onto the stretcher as they carried him up the slope. "No, buddy," Daniel whispered, wrapping both arms around the dog's chest as it fought to follow. "You'll be with him soon." At the top of the ravine, the back doors of the ambulance flew open. The medics pushed the stretcher inside, voices tense, movements sharp. The dog broke free of Daniel's grip and lunged forward. And one paramedic caught him gently by the harness. "It's okay," the medic said, softening. "He can ride with us." Daniel blinked in surprise. "You're sure?" "He won't leave him," the medic replied. "And honestly, I think the man needs him." The dog scrambled into the ambulance, immediately curling beside its owner. The doors slammed shut, the sirens erupted, and the ambulance tore down the road, carrying a man fighting for life. And a dog who refused to let him fight alone? Daniel followed close behind. The German Shepherd glued to the side of the gurney, refusing to be moved even an inch. Nurses made space. Doctors rushed forward. The dog padded beside them, steps shaky but determined like a guardian that had carried its human as far as it could. "Sir, you can't go back there," a nurse said gently. Stepping into Daniel's path, Daniel nodded. "I know. But the dog, he needs to see where they're taking him." The nurse glanced down at the shepherd, whose eyes swam with fear and loyalty. She sighed. "All right, just to the door." The dog followed until the operating room doors swung shut, leaving a cold, sterile silence in their wake. The shepherd let out a soft whimper and lay down against the wall. Head on its paws, ears drooping low, a doctor approached Daniel. "You were the one who found him?" Daniel nodded. "His dog led me, carried his cane all the way to the road." The doctor exhaled slowly. "His name is Walter. 78 years old, widower, lives alone." He paused. "He's been missing for almost 24 hours. Daniel felt his chest tighten. "Was he hiking?" "No," the doctor said quietly. "Walter takes that forest trail every morning, same route, same bench, same moment of silence for his wife who passed 2 years ago. It's his ritual." Daniel swallowed hard. "He must have fallen," the doctor continued. "And without his cane, he couldn't get back up." They both looked at the dog, who lifted its head at the sound of voices, eyes hopeful, as if begging for news. The doctor lowered his voice. "We think the dog stayed with him all night, kept him warm, tried to keep him awake. And when Walter became unresponsive, it went searching." Daniel knelt beside the shepherd, gently touching its fur. "You did everything you could," he whispered, "and you found help in the only way you knew how." The dog leaned into him, eyes shining, and in that moment, Daniel realized this wasn't just a rescue story. It was a story of love that refused to quit. Hours passed in the hospital hallway, each one dragging heavier than the last. Daniel sat on a plastic chair, elbows on his knees, while the German Shepherd lay curled at his feet, silent, watchful, unblinking. Every time a doctor walked by, the dog's head shot up, tail twitching with fragile hope, only to droop again when the footsteps faded. Then, finally, the operating room light clicked off, the door opened. Walter, frail and pale, was wheeled out on a recovery bed, an oxygen tube resting beneath his nose. He looked weaker than Daniel remembered, fragile, like a man who had almost slipped away. But his eyes, half open and searching, still held a spark. The dog bolted forward. "Easy," a nurse exclaimed, but the shepherd gently climbed onto the edge of the bed, pressing its forehead to Walter's chest with trembling urgency, tail wagging in soft, broken taps. Walter's hand lifted, shaking. Sloan settled onto the dog's head. His lips parted. "Buddy," he whispered, voice thin as air. The dog let out a small cry, part joy, part relief, part heartbreak. It nuzzled closer, whining quietly as if apologizing for ever leaving him, even though it had gone to find help that ultimately saved his life. Walter blinked, tears forming at the corners of his eyes. "You found someone?" he murmured, looking toward Daniel. Daniel stepped closer, offering a small nod. "He carried your cane to the road. He wouldn't stop until I followed." Walter laughed, softly a weak, breathless sound, but full of gratitude. "He's been my legs and my heart ever since my wife passed," he whispered. "I don't know what I'd do without him." The dog licked his cheek gently, curling beside him on the hospital bed as if refusing to ever let him out of sight again. For the first time since the rescue began, peace settled over the room. They were together, alive, safe, and the bond between them, stronger than words, was something no one watching would ever forget. News of Walter's rescue spread through town faster than Daniel expected. Even doctors, hardened by years of emergencies, stopped for a moment to smile. Everyone knew the story now, how the dog carried Walter's cane across the woods, how it braved the dark alone, how it begged a police officer for help when its owner could no longer fight for himself. Local reporters arrived by noon, cameras rolling as Daniel retold the events. The German Shepherd stayed close to Walter the entire time, occasionally lifting its head to check on him, then settling again with a tired sigh. By afternoon, the story went viral online. Hero dog saves elderly man's life. Loyal shepherd leads officer to owner near. Death dog travels miles with cane in mouth to get help. Comments poured in from everywhere, strangers offering prayers, artists sketching the dog's bravery, families sharing their own stories of loyal pets. Donations to Walter's medical bills began arriving from people he had never met. Volunteers offered to help with groceries, repairs, transportation, anything to make his recovery easier. But what moved Daniel most was the community gathering outside the hospital entrance. Dozens of people, young and old, had brought flowers, cards, and treats, not for Walter, but for the dog. Good boy, a little girl whispered, gently placing a small plush toy near the shepherd's paws. The dog sniffed it, then rested its head on Walter's blanket again, tail thumping softly. Walter blinked back tears. "I didn't think anyone would care," he murmured. Daniel smiled. "They care because your dog showed the kind of love people don't forget." The German Shepherd looked up at Walter, eyes warm and full of devotion. And in that moment, the whole town seemed to understand. Heroes don't always wear badges. Some walk on four legs. Weeks passed, and Walter slowly regained his strength. Each day, the German Shepherd never left his side, sleeping curled at the foot of his bed, following nurses during checkups, and placing its head gently on Walter's chest whenever he winced in pain. The two were inseparable, bound by a devotion that had already moved thousands of hearts. When the hospital finally cleared Walter to go home, a small crowd gathered outside. Neighbors, medical staff, and even people who had driven from neighboring towns after hearing the story. They stood quietly, respectfully, as Walter was wheeled out into the sunlight. The German Shepherd trotted beside him, chest proud, tail swaying like a flag of victory. Daniel waited near the exit, the cane in his hand. He stepped forward and placed it gently in Walter's lap. "You might be needing this again," he said with a warm smile. Walter chuckled softly. "If I ever lose it again, I know who'll find help." The dog pressed its head into Walter's hand, eyes closing in contentment. Walter stroked its fur slowly, voice cracking. "You saved my life, buddy. You saved me twice, once from the forest, and once from being alone." Daniel swallowed the lump in his throat. "He didn't just bring the cane," he said quietly. "He brought hope with it." The crowd applauded gently, not loud, not overwhelming, but with the kind of reverence usually reserved for true heroes. Children waved small handwritten signs. A woman dabbed tears from her eyes. A man nodded respectfully, whispering, "Good dog." Walter wiped his eyes and looked at Daniel. "Thank you for listening to him." Most people would have ignored a dog on the road. Daniel shook his head. "Not this dog." Walter smiled. "Not my dog." As they left the hospital grounds, the German Shepherd walked proudly beside Walter's wheelchair, never once looking away from him, never once letting him out of sight again. And Daniel knew, with absolute certainty, that dog didn't just beg for help, he fought for it. And because of that, a life and a love had been saved forever.